something called alienation. Now, by alienation, I'm not talking about aliens in a country. I'm talking about alienation in that where you are separated emotionally from something. You are detached emotionally from something. Now, the reason why I'm talking about alienation in this particular video is because we have, with the black wealthy or black rich, Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, we see this in Kanye West, we see this in Floyd Mayweather, that there is no group of people that is as useless, for lack of a better term, as useless as the black rich. Now, some of you, not enough of you, okay, this is basically, I'm talking about black folks, not enough of you know what alienation is. Since Kanye West made his comments, Trump is his boy and slavery sounds like a choice, it has become painfully obvious to me that more than any time in the last at least 70 years, 60 years, at least 60 years, black people have never been more ignorant of the facts of life, more ignorant of their situation, more ignorant of their circumstances, and more of a joke in American society and the world. And it is sad. It is sad. And it's sad because black folks don't know just how silly they look and how much of a joke they have become. And these are the black people who think they've made it. The black person who rides around in a beautiful SUV but lives in the worst part of town. The black person who has gotten a job because of affirmative action and thinks somehow he's made it because he's making $50,000 a year, while the rest of the world, and certainly the rest of the American population, laughs at him. So when I talk about alienation today, I will be talking about alienation with a very hard and saddened heart, that more blacks have no idea what I'm talking about, and that I have to actually give a lesson or give some kind of video class on alienation. Nevertheless, after I talk about alienation, more blacks will know what it means and why the black rich are actually useless, of almost no value, and are in many ways ideologically inferior to the white rich. Some people may know of alienation, those who are open-minded enough and educated enough to have read some of Marx, know what alienation is in the way that Marx explained it when he talks about the relation between the labor and the owners of capital, of means of production. When Marx talked about alienation of the worker from the product that particular worker is employed manufacturing, he was talking about an emotional detachment from that particular product, where you do not see yourself as part of that product. You see you merely as a tool of manufacturing that product, but you do not see yourself as being attached to that product, where you even take a certain amount of pride in the making of that product. To elaborate on this little more, so you understand what he meant by alienation, if you look at American products, for example, America has a very hard time keeping up with the rest of the world, not because of the inferiority of blacks or the inferiority of Hispanics. No. One reason is because of the lack of education, real education, on the part of its white population, which is 63%. Much of that is due to their lack of real education, although most people don't want to tell you that the 63% of that population, 63% of that population, which is whites, actually lack real education that would help America take its place on the technological stage, the world technological stage. But we'll leave that for another video. But one reason that whites or America has a very hard time competing on the world stage with products is not because the American worker demands a higher wage or a higher salary, but actually because the American worker feels alienated from the product. The American worker feels alienated from the product. One reason the American worker feels alienated from the product is because the worker in America has very few rights. All the rights actually reside, for the most part, with the employer. So you can walk into a job and you can be fired for no reason other than it's just not working out. Or you can be fired for no reason other than, well, we're just moving in a different direction. The worker, knowing that they just do not have a great deal of power, and understanding that the unions have even a less voice now than they have at any other time since unions were formed, and it's even becoming less because the people who own these businesses and the business infrastructure, major businesses don't want any part of unions. So what you have is you actually have employees who know they don't have a great deal of power, they don't have a great deal of say-so, and therefore they feel detached from the product. Because they feel detached from what they are manufacturing, then the product and the manufacturer of that product is going to suffer. Why? Because people are essentially just doing just enough, putting just enough out to make a living, but not enough to make that product or make the products made in America so good where they are superior to the same product made in other countries. So this detachment that a worker has from what they are actually doing is alienation when we're talking about economics, when we're talking about the relationship or the Marxist relationship between the thing being manufactured and those who sell their labor in order to manufacture them. When we talk about alienation in regards to people, we are talking about an emotional detachment. An emotional detachment. A feeling that you are somehow separate from them. There is no group in the world that is more alienated from their people. When we talk about no rich group that is more alienated from their people than the black wealthy or the black rich. So this is how you can have a Michael Jordan feeling good about not giving money to black homeless. This is how Charles Barkley can feel good when he gets on shows and he lambasts black people and saying, well, the fact that they're lazy is because their situation is because they're lazy, or being proud of telling a black person, get a job rather than give them $10, right? Or why Floyd Mayweather will basically give out turkeys maybe sometimes in November. But the bottom line is that if Floyd Mayweather died today, most of the people who would be hurt financially would be go-go dancers who he gives a lot of his money to, right? So when we look at Denzel Washington, who has nothing on Sidney Poitier, nothing whatsoever on a Sidney Poitier, right? For all practical purposes, is a Republican, and in my opinion, is a sellout. I thought for a second, what could I use that was a more intellectual term, but a sellout, right? And then we have Kanye West. So we have the black rich who are virtually useless to less fortunate blacks. And one reason is because of the alienation that the black rich actually have that separates them from the average black person living in the inner city. I will do another video giving the reasons why the black rich somehow have very little in common with, or so they think, have very little in common with the average black person. That will be separate because there are 4 or 5 different reasons why, and I want to have time to go through those particular reasons. But without a doubt, the black wealthy, the black rich are inferior ideologically to the white rich. And I will point out briefly in a few seconds why they are inferior. Yes, the white rich are superior ideologically and ethically to the black rich based on how they see their own people. So when we talk about alienation, again, we are talking about, when we talk about alienation from people, we are talking about an emotional detachment, a feeling that you are somehow not attached to them in any way that will warrant your concern for their welfare. No group, and I repeat, at the risk of being redundant, sounding redundant, there is no group of wealthy people that are as alienated and as separated from the larger body of their people than the black rich. If you want to look at whites and why the white rich are superior to the black rich, let's look at that for a second, right? For a few minutes. If you look at the average white person, America was basically, and I've said this before, and will continue to say it whenever I feel it's necessary. America, the so-called early New World, was populated by essentially three people: the religious zealot, the so-called free thinker, or the Enlightenment, or the elite of European or of English society, which were not elite at all, really. In many ways, they were perverts and other scoundrels. But then you had what was called the waste people, and these were criminals. These were people who were not very bright. They were maybe mentally challenged. For the most part, they were what most white people are today, just simply unexceptional. Just average white people who in English society back then just somehow could not make it. And they were called waste people. And essentially the New World, which is America today, was a dumping ground for unexceptional people from England, okay? In what is called the UK today, all right? Now, no matter what those people were, from the very first moment, an elite white and an unexceptional white and a religious zealot, white religious zealot, and a lower than average white person landed in this so-called New World, there was still a relationship. And that relationship was binding, based on them being white. Today, what you find is no matter how rich a white person is, they still want a certain level of comfort to be commanded by even the most mediocre white person. Let me repeat that. No matter how rich a white person is, they still have enough emotional attachment to their own people to want at least a minimal amount of comfort, okay, to be had, right, by even the average white person. So you never see this detachment of rich whites totally from the average white person. Now, rich whites may not want all whites to be as rich as them. Rich whites may not go out of their way to see that every white person knows how to become wealthy through stocks and bonds and real estate. But they will vote, and they will ask that legislation be passed, and they will expect legislation to be passed to ensure that white people, no matter how average, no matter how unexceptional, to make sure that white people have an advantage over every other racial group in America and in the world generally. This is why rich whites are ideologically superior to rich blacks. If you don't believe me, look at Roseanne Barr. Look at Clint Eastwood. Look at Bruce Willis. When we look at Roseanne Barr, Clint Eastwood, Bruce Willis, what was the major shock when people found out they voted for Donald Trump? Well, the major shock came from the fact that black people, they may not say it, but most black people thought they were cool white people. They thought they were cool. You know, Clint Eastwood, I'll never forget when his movie Unforgiven came out. I was up in Harlem when seeing another movie, And the coming attractions of Unforgiven came out, and he walks into a saloon. You didn't know it was him because it was dark. All of a sudden, there's a thunder, like a thunderclap, and the lights, the lighting from the thunder hits his face, and you see that scowl. And every black guy in the theater was like, "Clint, my man Clint," right? When Unforgiven came out, right, almost half of the audience, at least the first 2 weeks of its opening, half of the audience was black. Right, for Unforgiven. Most black folks thought Clint Eastwood was a cool guy. Most black folks thought Bruce Willis was a cool guy, right? Many black folks thought Roseanne was a cool chick, right? And they all voted for Donald Trump. Clint Eastwood went as far as to say that Donald Trump was the best president he's ever seen in history. We know Clint Eastwood is 80-some years old, right? Bruce Willis said he was a great president. Roseanne Barr said he was a great president, right? And why? Because those rich so-called cool white people were never cool enough. Were never so cool that they preferred for black people to dominate American society. They were never that cool for them to flip on their own people. So when we look at a Kanye West and you have these so-called diplomatic black folks talking about like Anthony Anderson and Neo saying, well, hey, this opinion and that. No, that kind of dissension should never be tolerated and is never tolerated by any other group. The only group that would tolerate that kind of dissension is the idiotic black people, black folks, who supported that kind of dissension on the grounds of some free thinking, right? And who's most of the people? Who makes up most of the people who actually supported Kanye West in his saying that, called for some kind of tolerance? Well, the rich black, who, as I point out, are totally inferior to the rich white ideologically, right? And those black folks who think maybe they've made it because they make $50,000 a year overtime, right? Drive the worst made cars, right? And wear clothes that the manufacturer never intended for them to wear in the first place, right? Those are the two groups that actually backed Kanye West, right? Those are two groups. So when we talk about alienation, there is no group, rich group, right? No group that is more alienated and more useless to their people than the rich black, right? And they in every way are inferior to the rich white. And they're inferior to the rich white because no matter how rich white people are, they do not want the power in American society, the influence in American society, right? They do not want that to be flipped. They would rather see their own in a position of authority than to see any other group, and particularly black group, in a position of authority. And because of that, the rich white is superior in every way, ideologically, to the rich black. The rich black is virtually useless. And a rich black person, not being for their own people, should never be tolerated by black people. Never. Kanye West should see the outrage in his record sales. R. Kelly should see the outrage in his record sales. CD sales, rather. Michael Jordan should see the outrage in his sneaker sales, footwear sales, whatever. Barkley should see the outrage in whatever it is that he is advertising, whatever program he is on. Floyd Mayweather should see the outrage in his ticket sales for his fights and for any event he's attached to. If black people had any real sense of pride and any real sense of nationhood, you would see that. Unfortunately, black people do not. And this is why they continually find themselves in the hole that they are in, and it looks like they will remain in that hole for some time to come. The only way to dig themselves out of that hole is for them to see the reality of their circumstances and the reality of their condition. And one of the realities of their condition and their circumstances is they allow their rich to continually sell them out, to the shame of themselves and to the shame to the shame of people who are consciously and proudly black. See you next video.